Okay, so I think I'm supposed to start. So welcome, welcome to the European Parliament. Of course, thank you to the co-organizers of this discussion, Globe EU Network and Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's very important that we have this discussion now on circular economy because we have a lot of things on our table. And either because we passed legislation under the last term and we are now in the drafting of what we call here delegated acts, meaning a décret, for instance, in French, or executive order in the US. And we just had a discussion on how important it is for decision of investment. But also we have other prospects of new legislations coming, like the Circular Economy Act, where, of course, your input is very valuable. I will just say a few words on the political context we are in before I hand over to you. First, as you know, the Green Deal has become more and more polarized under the last months/years. But so far, everything which is related to circular economy is less polarized or not polarized yet. And I hope that we will be able to stay like this, because once a topic is polarized politically, it is obviously very unstable, very complicated, very difficult to get predictability from a political standpoint and, of course, from an investor's standpoint and a company standpoint, because you don't know if the rules will remain, if the rules will be set, if there will be consistency or inconsistency, and so on and so on. And I must say that even if it's not the core of the discussion today, part of the agenda of the Green Deal is under that risk. It's obvious on cars, for instance. I'm not going to elaborate more, but it's something that, to my view, should be avoided at any cost, I would say, for circular economy. And so far, it's not polarized because, or thanks to, because it is seen as completely connected with the sovereignty issue and the competitiveness issue. There is no opposition at the very high political level. Okay, well, just you take a regular politician, he doesn't know anything about circular economy, okay, doesn't know anything about plastic, about that, but he thinks that, okay, if it is circular, it is more local, it is more local content, it is more independent, it creates more jobs. Okay, fine, it's good. I don't want to know more. I think it's good. So this is very important to keep on connecting the circular economy agenda with the competitiveness and the geopolitical agenda. And you are lucky enough to have this as a starting point, not as something you have to demonstrate, but as a starting point. Just keep it and keep this narrative. I think it's very important. Second message is that, of course, reality, we all know this here, is more complex. Because part of our waste are exported, part of our recycled content is imported, so far from, sometimes from very far away, let's say China. And of course, a circular economy is not always a local economy or a European-based economy. Even if the perception is it is, the reality is that it is not. So that's why we need to make sure that when it is not, we are able to contribute to make it local and really European circular. And we have a very good example with one of the texts I negotiated last time, which is the PPWR, so the regulation on plastic and plastic waste, where on packaging, sorry, where we had to introduce a mirror clauses at the very, very end of the negotiation. in order to avoid to have just a European market creating demand and others creating supply. Because of course, then we would end up in the exact same narrative towards China than other issues of the Green Deal and the green transition, like steel, like batteries, like EVs, and so on, like solar panels, and so on and so on. So that's why it is very important that we keep this narrative, and of course we make it for real. So that's why we just discussed minutes ago with companies very much interested in that kind of mirror clause. It's a battle of the local content, the real local content of the circular economy, which is key, And the last comment again, and that will be my conclusion from the political analysis, okay? Because you know better than I do the technicalities of it, and so on. So what I can bring to you is more the political analysis, is that we have collectively to manage the risk of circular economy not being perceived anymore as local. Because as soon as it becomes perceived as not naturally local, but actually you send this scrap to China, or you send this black mass to China, or you send this and so on and so on and so on to China, and then it goes back, then the political support might be more and more polarized, back to what I said at the beginning. So that's why it is very important to keep this as a precondition, then to move forward. Then on the agenda, the legislative agenda, I will just mention three of the elements I guess you are going to discuss. The first one is, as I said, the implementation of PPWR. A lot of new regulation in terms of delegated acts are in the process of being drafted. So important to have this in mind. Second, the eco-design regulation. A lot of new value chains will be covered by the eco-design regulation, as you know, and it is absolutely massive and unprecedented, because we changed the eco-design regulation in a way where before it was the exemption, now it becomes the rule. So all the delegated acts has to be now drafted by the Commission to set the concrete standards per value chain, product per product. So that's where we are going to win or lose this potential massive transformation. And the third one, to name just a few of them, I don't not even mention the battery regulation, I don't mention other specific sectoral regulations, is the Circular Economy Act, where probably what we can try to get is a single market approach that would allow for more efficiency in the way we go for the treatment of our waste and the circularity, so reducing the cost and being more circular, because at the end of the day, it's of course what we want. So I conclude there, but you sit on something which is absolutely key. It's the depolarization. It's a topic which is not polarized yet. So keep it this way. Try to do everything you can to keep it this way, and then we will manage to get it through. Thank you. Now I give the floor to you as the Director General? CEO, sorry, of Ellen MacArthur Foundation.
Thank you so much, Pascal. It's a real honour to be here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonquil Hackenberg. I'm the relatively new CEO of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I came into situ last November. We've been an official partner of GlobeEU since September 2020, so we're actually celebrating our 5-year anniversary this month, which is very exciting. And it also marks our 15-year anniversary of existence in general. I guess the collaboration started way before those 5 years, however, and it's really been instrumental in the work that the team has done at an EU level. Special thanks go to MEP Peter Kainen, who is not here but will be later, and also to Roland-Jan in his role as Secretary General. The work done by GlobeEU, bringing everyone together, as well as representatives from the private sector, is perfectly aligned with our strategy. We've always been at the centre of the business policy interface, and that's where we will remain. I guess where we see ourselves now, over the last 15 years, we've seen 75 countries have a circular economy roadmap and 55% of businesses having circular economy strategies, which is amazing. And yet we're not seeing it in action at scale, which is very much what we need, especially to address in a very apolitical, non-partisan, depolarized way, as you rightly said. If we look at some of the things about what the circular economy is about, and as it evolves, as this discussion evolves, it's useful to remind ourselves that it's a system change agenda and it's not simply a materials management strategy. It has 3 guiding principles. So eliminate waste and pollution. And again, that is apolitical and non-partisan. Keeping materials in use, that is exactly the same, and regenerating natural systems. It can also be looked at in terms of how we can ensure investment flows into infrastructure and innovation, for example, in 3 areas. 1, for example, feedstocks. So what gets put on the market in terms of nature and volumes helps provide the feedstocks in order to then regenerate and recirculate. For that, we need infrastructure. In process, including design for disassembly and remanufacturing, in upstream innovation of policy and products. And then in business models, how do we move to selling access rather than just products where applicable? And how do we design upstream policies and models that allow services to regenerate and are incentivized, not at a disadvantage or measured in a similar linear way than they are today? So what this entails in terms of policy is a focus on upstream measures, and the EU's eco-design for sustainable products regulation is a really good example of that approach. Despite the progress, we know that circular economy is still in practice, still translated back down to a question of waste management and recycling. And whilst that's important, it's not all that the circular economy offers. Efforts being made to take circular economy out of its natural habitat, environmental ministries, for example, but progress is slow on that front. And therefore, we really need to put economics at the centre of our argument that's really going to keep us depolarised. We need to move beyond thinking about it as a technicality. It's a transformation framework that opens up opportunities when it comes to innovation and reduction of harmful impacts and resilience. And perhaps because the circular economy is getting a lot of visibility and traction, we could be tempted to think that now we have a simple choice between linear and circular. But I think we all know in this room that it's not that simple. We also need to think about what the deliberate efforts are and where do we need to drill down and really focus on that economic argument and benefit. So this is about the way we envisage value creation. It's about the importance of moving from a model that consumes and depletes finite resources to one that builds economic, social, and natural capital. Now, today, if we're thinking about security of supply and value retention, if we're thinking about waste and waste avoidance, and really looking after the resources that we have within our regions, it's really going to remain at the heart of the circular economy, even more so than perhaps 10 years ago, given the current geopolitical context. And for that reason, we believe that circular economy as an organisation is language that will transcend today's necessities and will take us to build a better future for tomorrow. If we're thinking of critical minerals within the context of how they present themselves in our lives, for example, they are the backbone of digital transformation and energy infrastructure. If we think of EVs and consumer electronics as 2 such examples. Providing innovation and policy to enable fiscal benefits for secondary and even tertiary sales beyond those to give it to those who extracted it in the first place will ensure the security of supply balanced with responsible extraction. We think about extraction both on land and also undersea, and these things we need to be considering when we're designing policy to make that work. It also gives us an opportunity to create new value streams. Establishing incentives for collection and recirculation will ensure supply is retained in the regions where demand will soon outstrip supply, thereby reducing geopolitical strains. And we have a real opportunity to do that with critical minerals because we're not at that point that we are in plastics where it is everywhere and all-consuming in terms of how do we solve for it. Critical minerals is a high value chain, and it's also an opportunity for us to redesign and learn from the past in order to preserve the future. So if we think about critical minerals within the EU context, seeing as we find ourselves here today, currently, only 10 out of the 47 approved strategic projects focus on recycling, compared to 23 on extraction. This isn't really proportionate to the targets of the CRMRA. For example, that equals 10% of extraction and 25% of recycling fulfilled by domestic capacity by 2030. The CRM's Act could introduce formal ambitions on reuse and manufacturing as one example. There may be a window of opportunity for us to do this, given the Commission's stated goal for fast implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act in the Clean Industrial Deal communication. So the transition is underway, but we will only be strong and successful if there is a strong business policy dialogue, and we must establish and maintain that with urgency. We need to co-create new rules of the game. We need to learn from new business models, and these circularity business models, coupled with infrastructure to provide the feedstocks, is the way we need to be able to balance policy so that businesses are incentivized to think differently. The outcome of all of this is, again, as I said, it's going to address the realities of today, but create a regenerative, thriving economy tomorrow. So we're specifically focusing on EU matters today, and given the bloc's leadership in the circular economy for the past 15 years, it is a crucial centre of gravity. But if we're serious about scale, the transition we need is actually a global one. We can start locally and then expand and lead from the EU. Our role at EMF is to build bridges between markets. And we've done that with the facilitation, for example, of the EU-China Circular Economy Dialogue, or indeed the Brazil-China Circular Economy discussions. We wish to continue our lead in the circular economy at this business policy nexus, and we want to see circular economy at scale in the real world. We've focused in the past on ensuring that circular economy is on the roadmap and leading with that agenda for commitment. Now we're diving deep in 3 specific areas. Critical minerals is absolutely one that's here to stay, and the other 2 are plastics and packaging through the lens of infrastructure, reuse, and alternative new materials. The third is in retail, and how do we put the re in retail to ensure that we can give consumers the choices of the circular economy for repair, reuse, remanufacture, that indeed could be adopted for policy for critical minerals. So I'll conclude by saying once again that today's circular economy narrative will stay depolarized and will address the realities and the necessities of today, while shaping the leadership of the world's tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How does it work? You take the floor?
Yes, I think that the next stage is our first panel debate. So thank you very much for this wonderfully challenging, stimulating, scary, ambitious introduction. So that leads us seamlessly to our first panel with 4 speakers, which I'll introduce to you now. I'll give the floor to
Sorry, Bruno, I'm just saying bye-bye to all of you because I have to jump into the negotiation on the omnibus regulation, which is the final session. And I'm the pleasure to be one of the negotiators. So the meeting starts in 1 minute. Thank you again.
Wish you all the best. We have an omnibus. We have an omnibus for everyone these days. Why don't you try to make one fast train? Anyway, so my 4 speakers who will each get 5 minutes, which is a multiple of what members of parliament usually get in this building, which would also mean that we will enforce rigorously those 5 minutes. But since I'm bad at timing, I'll leave that to Roland-Jan. I'll limit my job to giving the floor to the first speaker now, who kind of perfectly aligns with, I think, the idea that we need to be looking at more than just recycling, and that we have to have a look at what we do before we recycle materials. So, Anders Wijkman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and sorry for being late. I was told the meeting started at 3:30 all of a sudden, so I wasn't mixed up. Well, thank you very much. I listened to most of your introduction and giving a good framework. Among my many hats, I'm also a member of the International Resource Panel, and many of you may know that last year in April we launched our most recent major report, Bend the Trend, where we have tracked natural resource use over the decades, and we came to the conclusion that the extraction of different types of materials has more than tripled since 1970, growing by roughly 2% yearly. And there is more or less a perfect link between the growth of the economy and resource use. And that has been happening ever since, I would say, the Second World War. And our conclusion is that we cannot go on like this, simply because the extraction and processing of different materials make up almost 60% of greenhouse gases and 90% of biodiversity loss. So we simply have to look at resource use differently. And it's not primarily any longer a question of clean supplies or greening the supplies. It's very much a question of curbing and changing demand. And we have to look at the provisioning systems, in particular in areas like transport and mobility, infrastructure and buildings, energy and food. And also, of course, electronics, textiles, tourism and recreation. All these sectors contribute to resource use very, very much. The problem is, of course, that while we conclude that we cannot just continue to increase, we also know that 4 billion people in this world live on very little materials. Their footprints may be 3 to 4 tons per year aggregately, whereas in my country, Sweden, we have something like 20 to 25 tons per year. So we in the rich countries, we have to step by step lower our material footprints. There's no way we can continue the way we have. To, on the one hand, save the planet, and to the other hand, make room for poor people. Now, circularity is part of the answer, but it's not the whole answer. Because even if we are even if we optimized circularity and went from linear to circular production models, we know that wear and tear and nothing is perfect. We would perhaps be able to reduce the demand for virgin materials by 40, 50%, not more. So we have to curb demand. And we have to start a discussion about quality of life, that quality of life is not primarily about buying stuff. It's about so many other things. And we have to embrace this concept of sufficiency. Now, when we look at the critical materials, this is, of course, extremely important because we want to electrify the economy for a number of reasons, curbing emissions, making the energy system more efficient, etc., etc. But if we only focus efficiency on critical materials, we won't get there. We have to change the consumption structure and consumption patterns all over the economy to be able to reach where we want to be. And I would mind you that even if solar and wind energy has gone down in prices, yes, in manufacturing, but extraction is another thing. And most of the ores we are now extracting are of much lower quality, meaning that we will need more energy and it will cost more. So don't buy that the cost decrease will just continue indefinitely. So we need to look at the economy as a whole and reduce and change the demand patterns. I would end by saying that there is one interesting light in the tunnel. We have established a task force within the Club of Rome on materials and materials consumption. I'm chairing it together with Louis Akenji from the Hot and Coal Institute. And some of the data we have come across is in particular from Germany, which shows that the material costs of manufacturing in Germany, and Germany is, I think, could be seen as a model for most other European countries also because it's so large and contains so many different industry sectors. Material costs make up roughly 45 to 50% of the cost base. And we used to talk mostly about, labor, work, cost for labor, wages. But this means also that resource efficiency and circularity, focusing very much on material efficiency, will mean that greenhouse gas emissions will go down. We will put lesser pressure on nature. And indeed, we will lower costs in the economy and we will enhance competitiveness. And I think this is very, very promising. So without knowing the exact figures and data for the other countries, I think Germany could be used a little bit as a model. Now, finally, what policy measures do we need? We need a lot of them, of course. Everything from the redefinition of waste to design criteria, etc. But I think the most important one, which is very often overlooked in discussions on circularity, is to look at the cost structure of the economy. And in most areas, it's cheaper to source materials from nature than to source materials in the secondary materials market. And as long as this is the case, we won't get the right kind of incentives. You could, of course, play around with quotas, saying that, oh, you need 20% or 30% of secondary materials in new products. But just imagine what the bureaucracy it would be. We could start in some areas, in some sectors, but think how much easier it would be if we had this push in the right direction. So lower taxes on normal wages and income and put a fee on the extraction of natural resources. It can probably not be done effectively in one of the member states, but it could absolutely be done within the context of the European Union. I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now all we need is a European fiscal authority, but there's always work in progress. Our second speaker in our next 5 minutes is Erik de Hoek from Eastman, who is also actually trying to look beyond recycling and to the entire value chain. I think we are seeing kind of a constant in this debate. Erik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for lobby you for this invitation and to have the opportunity to speak with you today and exchange on this fascinating topic, which is creating circular economies. Today, I'm going to talk with you a bit about, plastic. I guess the majority of, of people usually don't like very much plastic. We barely find people who are a big fan of plastics. But we all agree that there is somewhat a crisis about waste plastic. What is clear is that plastics are actually essential to a number of applications where it can't be replaced, I would say, by other materials such as aluminium, wood, or any other kind of materials. And sometimes you want to replace him, but the devil is in the detail, and you can create other problems. Just have an example here of a cup. You believe that by using a paper cup, you are making things more simple, but in reality, inside a paper cup to hold the water, there is a plastic film inside, which makes it much more difficult to recycle than if you just have plastic. So sometimes good intentions are not always, the easiest way to address the circular economy. So this, once, you've realized that plastics are essential, the key question is how do we create a true circular economy around plastic? In that regard, I really believe, I have the conviction that, EU has a great vision about that. But we are, in the EU, at a tipping point. Are we going to succeed in having a true regional circular economy, or are we going to fail in the execution? And it turns out that I think that a piece of that answer is happening as we speak during that week, because this week, we are at the end of the SUPD Implementing Act process. Should go for a vote to the TAC meeting in the next few weeks. And this is a critical piece of legislation for the future, for plastic, but also for so many other packaging in the future. So today I'd like to share with you really 3 convictions about how to create a local circular economy. The first one is that I believe that we need to have a clear and enforceable regulation in order to be able to create a circular economy. It looks like an evidence to say that, but the reality behind that is the fact that we all, I think, agree on the fact that there is a huge benefit, to have a circular economy on the long term. But it turns out that we usually only make decisions as business leaders or as political leaders on the short term. And on the short term, unfortunately, too often we see the cost of putting in place this circular economy. And it goes back to what you were saying, and there's a minute ago, usually going through a circular economy short term, it appears to be more costly than, but on the long term, we know that it is already the right solution. And it's critical to have those clear and enforceable regulation. I give you an example on the plastic topic. I think it's critical to make sure in any regulation in Europe, when we put in place circular economy, we need to make sure that we are going to treat our own waste, because this is the first intention in creating this circular economy. Having some targets about how many recycled content you want to have in your packaging is one thing. But the primary objective is to make sure that we are recycling our own waste. The goal is not to meet a target with some waste which would be coming from 10,000 kilometers away and then keeping incinerating our garbage in Europe. Because you know what? You will always find a cheap garbage somewhere in the world who is available to be incorporated in your packaging. So being local and treating our own waste, I think, is a critical point. It's even more, I would say, an ethical topic. The second conviction I want to share with you, which is, I think, good with the topic today, is the fact that circularity is really an instrument of sovereignty and supply chain resilience. Why do I say that? Because if you look at the objective of the PPWR, for instance, 40% recycled contents in 2040, in reality, we have enough waste and enough material in Europe to meet that target by 2040. So imagine in Europe, being able to supply 40% of those materials by 2040. You drastically reduce the dependency to some complex or very far away supply chain. And I can guarantee you that many countries, understand that, and many countries, don't want to see Europe being successful at circular economy because they know that it's going to reduce the level of dependency of Europe on those countries. So it's a critical question of sovereignty as well. The third conviction that I want to share with you is a conviction about living up to the contract of trust that we have with the EU population. Why that? Every day, we are 450 million EU citizens who are sorting our waste. And you put your waste in the green bin, yellow bin, whatever is the color in your own country. If you do that, it's because you trust, I guess, that this material that you put in your bin is going to be recycled. It's going to be treated, recycled, and then if you see it as a recycled content in the future of the packaging, you'll say, hey, this is the garbage that I've recycled. So what I've done as a citizen in the past, has created a result, and now I'm having that. But if you don't deal first about the EU waste, then somewhat you are breaking this contract of trust. And the EU population is going to look at us and say, hey, when I'm looking at the packaging, this packaging is not, the recycled content is not coming from EU waste. So where is it coming from? And by the way, what are you doing with my bin, when I put my garbage in this bin? Where is it going to, right? This contract of trust, I think, is critical for Europe. It's critical for probably our also institution and for our democracy. To conclude, I see the red line here. I want to conclude on the positive note. Maybe, I think that we have really today the opportunity to really create this circular economy. We can do it. It's not a question of technology. I think we have the technology. It's not a question really of cost, because at the end of the day, to create this circular economy, you know how much it is on the packaging? It is 1 cent per bottle. So it's not really a question of cost. I think it's really an opportunity today that we have in Europe to really make it happen. And also by doing it in Europe, I really believe that also we will gain the respect of other countries. Because who are we as European country? Who are we as European institution if when we put in place a regulation, we destroy our industry and we incorporate some recycled contents which are not, the waste that we have ourselves produced? Who are we then, as a civilization or as a continent? So I think we have this great opportunity today, and we are very committed to succeed here and to help the Commission, member of the parliaments, to get through all the challenges that we're facing on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. We will need all the help we can get. But I do very much appreciate the idea of the circle of trust and the trust that we need if we want to keep our promises.
Yeah.
Now, next on our list is Wenyu Weng. I hope I say that correctly. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who is going to look a bit at beyond European borders to the trust that we need with the rest of the world, if I understood it well. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. I want to talk about what we know and what we don't know. So here's what we know. We want to achieve the climate targets, and that requires an immense amount of critical minerals to feed our solar panels, to feed our wind turbines, to feed our EV batteries. We know that this is a priority, not just for Europe, but for the world. I think what most people don't realize is we're not talking about a degree of growth that is easily manageable. We're talking about an order of magnitude increase that is required for many of the critical minerals between now and 2040. And so that creates a fundamental scale challenge. It's not the case that you can simply permit mines and increase the rate of virgin extraction. It's not simply the case either that you can also meet any of the supply-demand discrepancy by merely increasing recycling. And I think it's great because this is the first time I'm having a conversation in the last 3 months where one of the speakers clearly and explicitly talk about demand-side intervention. What we know is even if you build all the recycling capacity that is planned today and you build up those name capacity, it still will not meet the long-term demand, in addition to many assumptions of accelerated permitting. So this is one thing to emphasize. Circularity, both on the supply side level and demand side level, are necessary. Of course, it is a competitive advantage. Of course, it is also about sovereignty, but it is also absolutely necessary. And on the demand side level, again, it's great as someone who is not from Europe to hear about demand side intervention because it's very clear we need demand side intervention. But we can be much more creative about how we think about demand side intervention. In June, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we launched our vision for circularity for critical minerals and EV batteries at our event in London. And we brought in stakeholders from across the value chain, from battery makers, car makers, recyclers, miners, policymakers, financiers. And our belief is demand-side intervention is not just about, for example, reducing demand. Of course, that is important to a great extent, but it's also fundamentally about changing the way we look at business model and innovating new business models. So to give you an example, battery swapping, the idea that you own a car, but perhaps not a battery, the battery ownership stays with the battery maker, gives them incentive to look after these batteries, gives them incentive to recycle and recover content from these batteries. It gives them also the ability to manage the charge and discharge of the batteries. This is one of the main reasons for battery degradation, is an ability to handle that. And then if you look even further down the line, I was in a conference earlier this month where the vast majority of audience came up to me afterwards and say they didn't know the stat that most private cars sit in your garage for 95% of the time. So it's not just about product redesign. It's about fundamentally changing how we interact in society and thinking about what is really the feature that we need, not what is the product that we need. So I think we know that this is going to be a challenge. We know there are options. We need to accelerate the options. And what's out there for us, right? I think as someone who is not European, you will find that not only you have allies, you have friends. And I can tell you a lot of times when I talk to, for example, Vietnamese infrastructure investors, Indian conglomerates, that what has happened with the EU battery regulation is a very welcome sign because it's a clear policy and market signal for how to sell into the market, including variants that provides incentives for circularity. That's one clear sign. It's also important to remember that not only you have friends, but they are very important. So 90% of urban population growth is going to be by 2050 in Asia and Africa. And if you want to talk about inner loops, outer loops, density of activity to create circularity around critical minerals, you absolutely have to work with these countries. And on top of that, you want to work with these countries because they are where you will sell your expertise. They are where you will sell your technology, your IP. And they are acutely aware that they have a window of opportunity to leapfrog because they're not dealing with legacy, they're building in circularity now. So the new future stock of digital and energy critical minerals is going to be in the urban areas in Asia and Africa, and they're looking to Europe for leadership. So I think we can rethink collaboration. It is not just a matter of collaborating to have greater sovereignty or collaborating to have greater competitiveness. It is also out of necessity, and it's also an opportunity for shared prosperity. And I think a lot of global South stakeholders, including private sector stakeholders, will agree. The final thing I want to say is, and this is not my area forte, but there is clearly a problem with finance as well. Because if you build all the recycling facility in Europe that has been announced, you get into a very interesting situation where in the short term, you actually don't have, for example, the right stock of EV batteries to fully utilize these capacities. Yet almost overnight, you will reach an inflection point really, really quickly where in the mid-2030s, for example, end-of-life EVs will all of a sudden overwhelm your ability to recycle them. So you go from a situation where you have a lot of stock in the longer term, but not a lot of stock in the near term to recycle, yet financiers judge NPV mostly by the cash returns that they get in the shorter term. So you don't have incentives to reward available capacity to be ready. And you also have an anti-finance perspective where the short-term returns are actually much less than the longer-term returns. So this is something to deal with. It's great to have targets, it's great to have ambition, it's great to have mandates, but to really bridge the gap, it needs to be circularity-friendly finance. That's it from me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for complicating the issue even more. Which is what meetings like these are for, obviously, and which is why we have such a thing as the European Commission, to whom we look for all the solutions and all the answers to all our questions, which makes me very happy that we have Johan Canton here from DG Grow to provide us with a simple answer. How are you going to fix all this in the upcoming Circular Economy Act, which is really going to have to change the world? So we are all ears because you count on you. Johan.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you as well for this little gimmick. I really like it. Would like to use it at home sometimes, but okay. So I will provide some answers. I'm not sure I can provide all the answers you ask in the context of the Circular Economy Act, because my main focus so I work in DG Grow, so the Directorate General dealing with internal market, industry, and so on. I work mostly on the implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act, so circularity from the perspective of the critical raw materials. Of course, I'm working closely with colleagues as well involved in the preparation of the Circular Economy Act. But I just wanted to explain a little bit where we stand. and also to react to some of the things that were mentioned already. So the context, I think, has been presented already by MEP Canfin and others on the, I mean, the challenge we face, at least from a raw materials perspective, is the high dependency, the very challenging situation we're in when it comes to the global situation, the low recycling rates when it comes to strategic raw materials. Just to give one figure, I think we only recycle 1% of the rare earth that is in materials today, in products today. So very, very low recycling rate compared to other non-strategic or critical raw materials, I would say. And the supply shocks, the challenges that we're facing with the way our dependencies are being weaponized, to put it simply, and us dealing with the supply shocks in consequence. So what is it that we've tried to do to achieve that? It's a series of elements in the context, in particular, of the Critical Raw Materials Act, but not only, with some ambition. It was mentioned before, and thanks actually to people in this building, we had a very high ambitious objective when it comes to the recycling and the recycling of materials, since we're supposed to cover 25% of our demand of strategic raw materials by 2030 through recycling. And this is indeed a very, very ambitious objective. And in order to achieve this objective, we have a number of delivery tools. One of them, and this was mentioned by Jean-Claude, is the strategic projects. And indeed, you're absolutely right. So strategic projects are projects selected under the Critical Raw Materials Act along the supply chain, from mining to recycling and including substitution. And indeed, we have, in the first round, selected 10 strategic projects that deal with circularity. And I would say even only 10. To my surprise, to be honest with you, I was expecting more projects, more applications on recycling, also more quality projects. But I think there are some explanations for why this is so low and why we should aim, and I'll conclude with that, but we just launched a second call last week, so why we should also aim at more recycling projects. So just to give you an idea, we have recycling projects dealing with PGMs in catalyst and catalyst converters. We have recycling projects dealing with rare earth in Italy, in France. We have recycling projects dealing with WEEE, so the electronic equipment. And then 5 projects dealing directly with the recycling of batteries, or directly or indirectly with the recycling of batteries and therefore black mass. And I think one of the challenges indeed for these projects, the successful and the non-successful ones, has been the access to the feedstock. The access to the black mass, either because the products haven't reached end of life yet, and I'll come back on your point on the financial structure and the financing incentives there, or because these products have reached the end of life, but they leave Europe. They go somewhere else to be recycled somewhere else because the economic conditions, for better or for worse, are better elsewhere. And that, I think, has been a main challenge for these recycling projects to emerge and for these recycling projects to succeed. And this is something we will need to continue to monitor and support. So how do we try to do that? First, by implementing the legislative part of the Critical Raw Materials Act. So very soon we expect to discuss and hopefully adopt an implementing act that will help member states dealing with the implementation of their national circularity programs by listing the products and components that have a huge CRM potential. So basically trying to put the emphasis on the products that matter. This is something that we have to do. We have a number of things to do in dealing with extractive waste and the recycling of the recovery of CRMs from old extractive sites. We have the question, and we are very concrete in the measures we have in the Critical Raw Materials Act on permanent magnets, where we have to label the permanent magnets and the rare earth that is in there, and then develop a system to be able to identify where the share is, how to increase the recycling, and later on how to put more recycling or recycled content in these permanent magnets. So a lot of things that are being done in this context as well. Legislation is not enough, so we're also working on supporting research and innovation. I think this hasn't been mentioned too much so far, but this is very important, and we actually have a very significant budget under Horizon Europe, and we'll continue to have this to finance research and innovation on substitution, on recycling, and on the rest. We also need to discuss, of course, the financing of these projects. It is a challenge to support these projects. I think the Innovation Fund has managed to help some of them, or can help some of them. But in the medium term, we strongly believe and count on the support of the European Competitiveness Fund. So again, this is in the hands of the co-legislators now, but this is an important initiative for us because it can finance a lot of things in relation to raw materials and support this transition indeed, the bridging the gap between what we can do now and what we know will be available in the future. The rest, the design, the product design has been mentioned, the question of the recycling infrastructure, building the recycling infrastructure in Europe, the harmonization or at least alignment of policy, these elements have been mentioned. Last but not least, one thing important for us as well, yes, recycling is essential. Yes, circularity is essential, but we continue to consider that when it comes to access to critical and strategic raw materials, at least for the short to medium term, we will also need primary raw materials. We will also need to continue to mine sustainably, process sustainably, refine sustainably in Europe and in strategic partnership countries so that we decrease our dependencies and have access to the technologies we need for our green, digital, defense, and aerospace needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have some time for reactions. I know that Anders wants to come back in on the demand side interventions. I'm looking at some of the other speakers. I'll give priority to the speakers to react and then to the rest of the room. So Anders, you come first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Commission representative. You didn't really touch upon the demand side issues either than towards the end, because you said, yes, we need to look at materials in general. And there I agree. But I think the demand side approach has to be center stage. Absolutely. There's no way we can continue with this wasteful society. And one of the problems to me is, of course, that we have an economic model, the neoclassical economic model, which in the model, nature, natural resources, energy is not part of the bloody model. It's energy blind, it's nature blind. And maybe it was understandable 100 years ago when the model was developed, when innovation, technology, financial capital, skilled labor was very scarce resources and nature was abundantly large. But it's the opposite today. And still we train economists like we do, as if nature was a constant, and it's not. So I think there is one of the problems. Secondly, with regard to provisioning services, I'm very happy that when you focused on it. We have in the Bend the Trend report, the IRP report, we have looked into some of these provisioning services. And we have calculated that, for instance, mobility in large cities could be organized very, very differently and lead to a reduction in resource use and resource demand, which is significant, and which would bring about also nicer cities, cleaner cities, less noisy cities, etc., more livable cities. We have also looked into infrastructure and buildings. Of course, we have looked into food. And then energy system is, of course, a very important sector. And I repeat, extraction is going to be more expensive, very much more expensive in the years to come. So that's an extra argument why we have to do this in an efficient way and why the whole system has to be much more efficient. Finally, with regard to dependency, I have nothing against this objective to try to increase extraction of some of these critical raw materials in Europe. I know that my own country is part of the equation, Sweden. But I think we should be realists. If we want this transformation to take place in the near future, in terms of electrification, we have to have closer cooperation with China because they sit on all these resources, deposits and processing capacity. And let's leave Trump, he can do his thing, but we need a partner that has more or less the same objectives. And I believe the Chinese understand that they cannot continue with the kind of growth policies they've had. They are changing the growth path, and we could cooperate with them. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. It would be interesting to have it would be a challenge to have a debate in this building or anywhere in Europe these days without someone mentioning Trump. But I'm not going to blame you for doing the temptation is huge. I think, by the way, that that the question is not just about taking nature into account. I think there's another problem with our model. When you just said that my car is probably 95% of the time in the garage, that's true. So we probably need only 10% of the cars we have, or let's say 30% of the cars we have. Try explaining that to the people who are building the 100% of the cars these days. I think it's more than just about taking nature into account. And I'm not saying we don't need to do it, but we need to find a way to get past that challenge. I have someone with a pressing question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I know quite a few of you, and we've been talking about these things for a while now. On the topic of the car, actually, our figure was 92% of the time the European car sits idle, and that was in our Growth Within report published actually here in 2015. So it already goes a long way. Anders, thanks a lot for your remarks on the economic underlying conditions. That's something that we fully share. The actual model is hardwired for and by linearity and extraction. And if we don't address that, we run the risk of putting some circularity plugins onto an otherwise linear model. And in that spirit, we are co-organizing together with GlobeEU and our partner in Intesa Sanpaolo in December a workshop specifically addressing the fiscal conditions needed in order to get to circular economy to scale. Because I was in the Clean Industrial Dialogue on circularity in July, and every single participant around the room mentioned the fact that those fiscal conditions and the underlying economic conditions were geared towards linearity and therefore were preventing us from getting to circular economy at scale. So I think that the challenge really is, do we want to have a token circular economy or do we want to have a systemic one? And if we don't break through the fiscal conditions, we won't get the latter. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Very useful. I wanted to come back to one of the points that Joanne mentioned about innovation and substitution, which of course I think is very important. Thank you for mentioning it. But I wanted to ask about the global element of circularity. We have a number of free trade agreements, including with Canada, EU. A number of those countries are producers of critical raw materials, rare earths, etc., some of which are also recycled. Is there potential in this context to have a more global circularity? In other words, bringing together the EU economy with some of those countries' activities to make the whole element, of the whole aspect, the whole circle.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Veronica and I work for the European Recycling Industry Confederation. Thank you all for raising some very important remarks, especially with the remarks made by Eric. I think we are not being clear about the full picture because in the EU we have recently had new measures, including, the revision of our waste shipping rules. That actually contribute to making sure that we do not export resources that couldn't be turned into new resources for recycling. So on that end, I think that has been a bit misleading. Secondly, actually, we do think, especially for plastics, that it is absolutely necessary to include measures that will stimulate the demand, because currently the recycling industry, especially for plastics, is really in a terrible stage because there is just not enough demand in Europe for this type of materials. So we think that, ambitious measures should be introduced in different frameworks, including, for instance, now the end-of-life vehicles regulation that is being negotiated. And this should include, more positive incentives for mechanical recycling as well, and also a closed loop system for plastics. Additionally, coming back to the point on waste definition for batteries, we think it's also in the framework again of the end-of-life vehicles regulation important to clarify that once a vehicle, for instance, reaches the end of life, it should be only after the assessment of the status of the battery to be defined whether it is a waste battery or not. The reason being that if once a vehicle is discarded, it automatically becomes waste, according to the Waste Framework Directive. But this is not true because sometimes the batteries that are inside vehicles are still operational. So in that case, to be fully aligned with the Waste Framework Directive, we should make sure that these batteries can be either reused or repurposed. I think that would be all. Thank you.
I think those are both valid points. I'll see Eric wants to react.
Yeah, just a quick reaction to make sure that my idea was clear. If we look at the facts now, in the past 2 to 3 years, 20% of the EU capacity for recycling of plastic, and mostly mechanical recycling, because this is what exists today, has disappeared. And I think that, like everybody in that room, probably you're following the news, and every week you have news about companies who have actually believed in the EU dream, in the EU vision to create a circular economy, who are right now collapsing. 20% of the capacity, it's huge, you know. And all of the projects in chemical recycling are on pause right now. You know, our project is on pause. Why that? Why that? It's because it's not competitive to invest in Europe to recycle the waste. Because we are facing some waste which are coming from outside of Europe, which have a cost structure way different, so we can't compete against that. So we have two ways to address that. Either we fix the problem and we find a way to recycle our own waste, or we go invest in China or in India or in Indonesia. And we just treat the waste over there, we ship it to Europe, and we incinerate the waste in Europe. But I don't think there is so many other choices. So the key question for us is, are we really willing to walk the talk when we say that we want to create a circular economy? That's my only question. And my point is to say, I think history has proven that if we want to do that, it has to be circular. You know, we need to make sure that what we put in the yellow bin or in whatever the color is, you know, in that room, in the parliament, is what is going to get recycled, you know, and be part of the circular economy in Europe. If we don't do that, if we cannot achieve these first steps, I think everything behind is meaningless.
That sounds like saying that in that case, we need to have recycled content made in Europe in our regulations instead of just recycled content.
But maybe one more thing, you know.
Which I couldn't agree to more, by the way.
But what I say might appear as common sense. I mean, maybe it's common sense. But where I need your help here in this room today is that I realize that when I talk about this topic in so many different places, it's difficult really to put that in place. You know, it's a hell of a fight to convince everybody that this is what we need to do. So maybe I'm missing something, and I'm calling for your advice on how to make it happen, how to really make this circular economy, you know, a true regional topic.
Thank you. So I have two more speakers. Well, I see three and more, but being just a humble member of Globe EU, I don't want to take the time away from our venerable president and her panel. So last words for you.
I was going to address the EV battery point, but just before that, completely agree. But I think that's sort of the point I was trying to make earlier. If you just look at, if you compress the timeline and conversation to how can we extract primary critical minerals as much as possible, you inevitably lead to these conversations about faster permitting, streamlined permitting. A lot of times you don't then have the ability to sit down and discuss a lot of these social justice and sustainability issues with as much care as you should have. So that is why circular supply is really important. That's also why a couple of people on this panel really want to talk about demand side solutions, because I think until you address demand side circularity, you're always going to be fighting an uphill battle where you're trying to match demand. And at the end of the day, if you don't have demand side solution, you're just addressing like a numerator and not a denominator, right? You're not reducing the overall pressure to extract. And that's still a problem, I think, for the issues you're talking about. Just very quickly on EV batteries, I completely agree with the speaker earlier. It's very important to remember that we need to separate clearly in our taxonomy the end of use case and the end of life for that critical mineral, right? So if you have an EV battery that's beyond degradation, that cannot serve an EV car, you can take it out of the EV car, put it and connect it to the grid, and it serves as very good grid backup and grid resilience. And you know who would love to have that? Global South countries that have off-grid and weaker grids. So the end of the EV battery use case is not the same as the end of EV battery life. That battery can serve multiple purposes. If you look at a lot of times and think creatively about where collaboration can happen, That's sort of the point, right? That you can be using these EV batteries that can no longer serve a purpose in cars, that serves an amazing purpose for socio-economic development elsewhere. So yeah, I agree with that point.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to conclude this panel and pass the floor to our eminent president, Sirpa. It's your turn.
I thank Bruno for leading the discussion, and I'm the bad guy cutting off all the good interventions that were up and coming, but hopefully you have a chance to continue it with the next panel. And the next panel is about the circularity and the Green Deal. So how do we actually put our feet on the root? And I hear the comments here and share the frustration. Anders has done it much longer than me. So we know all this. We have discussed more than 20 years, in some cases 30 years, about what kind of changes we need in our economy.
52 years.
52 years. You beat me. About what we need in our economy, what we need in demand side, what we need in our regulation, in our financial structures, and you all. And we are coming back to the base square and start all over again. So let's discuss with our next panel what needs to happen so that we move towards the circularity in real terms, and how we should actually put that in the Green Deal, in our growth strategy, in our startup and scale-up strategies, our bigger bioeconomy. And this is where it gets complicated, as we know, in the politics. Because if you see a linear economy and you act according to a linear economy, you might be more effective and you run faster, but you might be running on the wrong direction. And I'm not only talking about diesel cars here, but many other issues. So how do we make it? What needs to happen in industries? What do you require that we really get the circularity running? Because with the wrong conditions, we can ask what we want to happen, but it won't, because if the regulation is obstacle, if it is not profitable, if all the reused or circulated materials are more expensive than the firstly extracted, the equation just doesn't work. So with these small tasks, we have a very good group of experts with us, and let's start with Camilla Slupek from Eurometor, and hear your comments on this, Camilla, where you are.
Right,
thank you.
You
wear exactly. Just the purpose. Please, the floor is yours.
We can effectively communicate even by winking.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Camilla, and I'm representing Eurometor, an association that is the voice of the metal industry, a full value chain that we represent for the non-ferrous metals, starting from extraction through transformation and also to finish with effective recycling of metals, so we can bring them yet to another use in the different products. Metals, non-ferrous, are starting from A, like aluminium, ending alphabetically with Z, like zinc. In the meantime, you will find metals that are called cobalt, nickel, lithium, or gold or silver. Just make your choice, because the club is very big. So challenges, but I would rather say conditions for effective recycling of those metals under the circular economy can be grouped in the following ways. Access to raw materials, then we will speak about products, then we will speak about waste, and at the end, the coherence. 4 subjects that I would briefly like to address today during my 5 minutes intervention. For the access to raw materials, we need to be sure that this access for the primary, but above all secondary raw materials, is granted. We need all that for the applications in the green digital transition, but also to the defense applications, and this is becoming increasingly important. When we speak about products from the very beginning, they have to be designed with sustainability and circularity in mind. Everything starts from the drawing board of the designer. However, let's be mindful about the fact that the product lifetime largely plays a role to the moment when a product will enter effectively into the waste stream. Before the product can get to waste, we are told by the European rules that we also have to take into account reuse, remanufacturing, so various steps until the product is really no longer a value and it makes more sense to recycle than to use it continuously. Then waste. For waste, we have still a big trauma, a big headache when it comes to the leakage of valuable waste materials. That accounts to the metal scrap, aluminium or copper, these are the first examples, but also that accounts to the leakage of the black mass that we know is so rich in the metals we represent. So the leakage of waste has to be addressed effectively so we have enough feed material for our recycling facilities. But then when a product becomes waste, it has to be then effectively collected. And one of the saying of my colleague, it is, what is not collected cannot be recycled. Remember all that. When we have waste that is collected, then it has to be effectively sorted and delivered to the right facilities that will take care of it. And these are facilities that are using high quality recycling technologies that allow us to recycle as much valuable materials as possible. This is sometimes contradictory to the recycling that will happen outside of the EU, where because of the poor technique, you will just be able to reach out for the base metals, like, for example, aluminum or copper. But then you will ask a question, what happens with those that are more specific technology metals, like nickel, like gold? They have to be, and in the European facilities, they are thoroughly recycled and they are brought back to the following use. But before the waste gets to the recycling facilities, sometimes it has to pass a little way even inside the EU. So we have to go for an effective shipments of waste. And we know, because of the non-harmonized classification of waste, when we sometimes give a status of waste in one country as hazardous, yet it gets a status of non-hazardous in another country, then these discrepancies are really bringing a headache, and sometimes they effectively stop the waste shipments, and recycling facilities are in waiting and see mode because the practical steps of the waste shipment and the documentation has to be effectively solved before you are allowed to actually move on with your waste shipment. That is why we have to really support this shipment of waste with clear rules, with harmonized rules, because it will only be supported for the circular economy if waste are effectively recycled in the facilities that are fully equipped to do that. And last thing, I know I've already exceeded my 5 minutes, but one thing to really say, we are in the house that is really governing official rules of the EU. Coherence and full implementation of the EU legislation, the one that we adopted in the previous legislatory cycle, like, for example, on the batteries, on the waste shipments, or the one that will be or is now debated, like end-of-life vehicles, or will be debated on electronic waste. Here, we have to strive for the full coherence. What we have already written so far cannot be disregarded in the future discussions. And even better, what we have written so far, and we said it is not optimal for an effective EU circularity, let's amend it. Thank you.
Thank you. This is what we legislators were supposed to do, so the coherence out point taken. And I take quite a number of points, especially how do we create the closed loop economy and through European market of raw materials. And there comes the big issue also that is quite often debated. shall we all treat first as a waste, collect together and then sort? Or then do we create more this kind of a direct industry to industry loops? And this is where the jury is a bit still out, and I'm not quite certain how to change our waste regulation in the longer. But what Guillaume, Umicore has quite a lot of knowledge in this side. So could you please continue?
Thank you. Thank you, Sirpa. Be here. Sorry. Thanks for the invitation. Where to start? I will build on some thoughts that have been shared at the table and speak obviously for Umicore. We are a materials technology and a recycling group. With the example of batteries, we are effectively the only European or Western manufacturer of battery materials that has global footprint and that does the full value chain of refining the raw materials. So we source raw materials. We're not into mining, but we source raw materials. We refine them, transform them into products like the powders that go into the batteries. And we recycle. We recycle precious metals and we recycle batteries as well. Started with smartphones. Today it's about EV battery recycling. So I'll share a few thoughts. First, maybe about what does this represent for a company like ours, where we specialized in precious metals recycling from electronic waste, printed circuit boards, 200 different kinds of streams, most of them waste streams, sometimes primary materials as well. But it's a mix we process in our plant in Antwerp, and where we extract pure gold, silver, platinum, palladium, 17 metals that we extract from very complex materials. That's one thing. That is growing. With the example of e-waste, we know that is growing. That keeps growing 2% per year. About 15% and also growing is being exported out of the EU, and only 40% is actually effectively recycled by companies like Umicore. So that is something we already need to deal with. Batteries is new. I mean, this is nascent business, battery recycling. And somebody alluded to the volumes that will come. And indeed, we have to face a transition. Today, as a battery recycler, we have an industrial plant. It's a small plant. It can take 25,000 batteries from EV cars. It's also on the same recycling plant in Antwerp, 1 hour drive from here. But that's a small industrial plant. We wanted to build a larger plant. We postponed the plans with 6 years because it will not be operational before 2032 because the market changes. The electrification is not at the pace that everyone anticipated several years ago. And luckily, the cars are put on the road to drive, and they drive. And lifetime of batteries, apart from the fact that they can be extended and have a second life, so the volumes are less than anticipated. But that is, let's say, a Umicore thing. When do we think the time is right to invest on a large scale? But the thing is, how do you feed it? Where does the feed come from? And I'll share some insights into what happens today with battery waste, which in 2030 will be in Europe only 400,000 tons. In 2035, 800,000 tons. And from then on, it will rocket because the batteries will come back end of life at some point in time. And then China, not to only talk about China. Korea is also very strong in batteries and battery recycling. So let's talk about Asia at large, but the dependencies. And let me maybe start with the dependency. We are building our complete dependency on our future mobility. We have an ambition to decarbonize transport. That's the right ambition. Believe that electrification is the way to go for decarbonization of transport, certainly for the cars and the light vehicles. Today, we are building on complete dependency. Because what happens, and I will allude to the example that Mrs. von der Leyen gave in her State of the Union on the small affordable cars initiative. No much details are known about small affordable cars. And it's the social aspect that was mentioned as well. Because of course, mobility has to be available for everyone. And today we electrify the large cars, the SUVs and so, because that's where the money can maybe be earned. And the smaller segments have to follow. If tomorrow we build in lithium iron phosphor in the batteries of small cars, that's another dependency. Because the reality today is that LFP is a fantastic innovation that the Chinese have done. They made it very performant, but we are importing those batteries. 90% of the batteries that we use today in cars are being imported. There is not so much value in LFP to build circularity, to recycle in the future. Phosphor is only at scale available with the quality that is needed from Asia. So there you go. You import the batteries with LFP, and at the end you cannot recycle them because there's no value in the recycling. Not to say that Umicore has another technology, as many others have, but that's nickel, manganese, cobalt. That's a choice. That's a technology choice. That's a choice that OEMs have also made. They qualified for that because of the performance. And there's a price tag to that because the raw materials are more expensive. But there's value in those materials. So if you have a long-term thinking, you don't want to create your own dependencies today on technologies that actually make you dependent on sourcing the primary stuff. And then at the end, you cannot recycle them because there's no value in recycling. While you have an alternative that maybe has definitely different properties in terms of performance, but also a different cost structure, but that has value to be recycled. Because that's exactly why we have a business today on recycling of precious metals. There is value in these materials. Platinum, palladium that comes back from spent catalysts from the combustion engines. And Umicore has the privilege to serve all the platforms of the automotive. So I'm speaking from a technology neutral point of view in principle, because we give catalysts to the combustion engine, we give battery materials to the battery manufacturers. We make the catalysts that go into fuel cells, and you have the hybrids. So for me, it doesn't really matter, but what I'm trying to understand is, and then you get into the politics, of course, and what we're here in the house, let's say, to talk that, but what is our strategy? Do we have also longer term thinking in the choices we make now? And the big difficulty, the big challenge today is, of course, today. Can we build a business on batteries today? And can we build a business on battery recycling for the future? I gave the example of e-waste and precious metals. Of course, these are much more expensive materials. Basically, the recycling is paid by itself because of the value of the materials that are being recovered. And that's why I allude to the batteries. There must be value also in recycling. Otherwise, somebody's going to pay. And let me conclude maybe with what's the things we can do. Local content. I think we alluded to it as well. Made in Europe. Why not? I mean, we are far from against, we are embracing. If you have technology leaders, and the Asians are technology leaders in the fields that I mentioned, particularly in batteries, embrace it, let them invest, but under conditions, just like Europeans had to invest under conditions 30, 40 years ago in China. And so that's possible. And one of them is local content made in EU. And then you have many other ways in which you can try to embrace and have technology transfer and also the know-how built here. So I'll leave it there. I'm pretty excited about these things because that's our bread and butter, that's our DNA. We face together with you a huge transition and all the challenges that come with that. And yeah, we try to play a role and also see, of course, where does this all go to, because in the end, as a company, we also look into where to invest and what's the return on the investment, just like our shareholders expect that from us and anyone who's putting money in this. And so we've got a big challenge as a society, I would say, and we have all our role to play. So thank you again for the invitation and happy to enter any discussion that you would like to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to make the life even more complicated is the fast pace of development in technologies, and next step, as we know, is solid state and sodium, magnesium, or whatever batteries.
But solid state is based on NMC, so that's valuable material. That's
okay. Exactly. So we need to be ready to recycle that and reuse that as well. So the principle is same. And what about sort of it was raised here, just out of the box thinking. If the materials were leased and they were owned by some certain entity, and by that way we would have created this kind of an ownership to the producer and reuse. Okay, how that would work in bioeconomy and construction side, Miriam Trievpatska. I'm still trying to pronounce your name correctly. One day it'll work. From Target. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Yes, thank you very much for the organization of this discussion today. It's very interesting to talk about critical minerals, but I would say that all materials will become critical in the circular economy, and we shouldn't forget as well the common sense we need to have in developing policies for circular economy. So a few words about Tarkett. Tarkett is a French company, flooring manufacturer. So we produce carpets, we could produce vinyl floors, we produce wooden floors, and we've produced as well sports surfaces, indoor, outdoors. And we have a global footprint. So we produce mainly in the geographies where our customers are. So in Europe, we are European, in Asia, we are Asian, and in the US, we are Americans company, and our customers are there. So our journey in Tarkett started towards a shift to circular economy around 2009 with decisions that were taken at the top. And then we started to work. We made our homework, if I would say, starting with reviewing product, eco-designing them so that they can be recycled. And in our business, construction, health is an important aspect, and as well legacy additives. So from the start, we added to our circularity principles, the principle of selecting good materials that are not hazardous, and as well having rolling action plan. Every time there is a new information on potential hazardous, we substitute them. So we have rolling plans for making product more recyclable, with good materials. But then we addressed as well the end of the story with implementing in our main factories for each of our product recycling facilities. So we are able to design, produce material products that can be collected and recycled. And of course, for connecting the dots, we have our own collection system. So we started to develop collection system at our own cost around 2010, and we have some experience. We were, for instance, very enthusiastic when France started with the first law on circular economy in Europe and implemented an EPR scheme for construction products. Today, 3 years later, after its implementation, we see that the government wants to reframe the system because it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the fundamentals have not been addressed at the beginning. First example, we need to have sorting at source. Plastics, and vinyl floors are plastics, have been mixed up in the same bin that pipes all types of materials. And unfortunately for our business, we do not produce gold. We do not have metals that have high values. Our waste do not value anything. So it is really complicated for us to divert our waste streams from landfilling and from incineration for heat recovery, for instance. So all that needs to be considered in the future work for developing the Circular Economy Act. Of course, I will not come back on what Camilla said. We need harmonize. We need to have no barriers within Europe, but we need to be within Europe to some extent to make the circular economy fly. We need as well, and that was not addressed in the earlier conversation, we shouldn't mix the regulations. We are talking about the plastic packaging waste regulation. We are talking on Waste Framework Directive that have been recently revised. How comes that requirements for products are developed in waste regulation? That doesn't work. We need all requirements for circularity of product to be addressed in product regulation, being ESPR or, in my business, in the construction product regulation. We have harmonized standards. I do not know if we need to have minimum recycled content, because to be honest, it's not, if you do not have the material, you will not reward anyone because you cannot raise the bar. But anyway, but if there is a need for a minimum recycled content in a product, it needs to be dealt within the product regulation. So that's something that needs to be clear in the Circular Economy Act. no parallel regulation to implement minimum recycled content. I say that strongly because in my business, I use plastic. So if I see, for instance, we need to have minimum recycled content in PVC, that might not work because at the same time, we need to produce safe product and on which people will not slip. We need to produce products that resist on an acoustic perspective, that are durable. Our products should last 25 to 30 years. So we have other requirements that we try to match. And indeed, we are making circular products, and we recollect used floors from hospitals or from IKEA, for instance, globally in Europe, to make new floors. So we have experience in circular economy, but we still lack incentives and reward for what we are doing. I think our linear economy shows its weakness regarding the competitiveness and unfair competition that we are facing today. Flooring, 80% of the products that are put on the market come from China. That's the reality. We work on competitiveness, we improve, we automatize, and we have as well, we need as well to restructure sometime our industry to continue to compete in that work, in that context. But there will be no magic with the circular economy, because on the competitiveness, we will add a new step, which is, what about the competitivity of our recycled content? Where does it come from? So in Europe, our recycled content comes from products that were REACH compliant. What about recycled content coming from any part of the world where REACH does not exist? You know that, for instance, in Europe, hazardous waste cannot be diluted to meet a threshold. That's a golden rule in Europe. Doesn't exist in China. So in China, I could find in products some orthophthalates that are forbidden in Europe. We could find other hazardous substances that are not allowed in Europe. So I come to the point that I think that for the sake of the industry in Europe, we need as well to consider a European base for circular economy within the border of circular economy of the European Union. And I will come back to the example of France. France made a decree which will be applicable in 1st of January for plastic packaging, with an incentive to recyclers, hoping that the money will flow, but it is limited to 1,500 kilometers. France was not allowed to limit it to the French territories. So they took a little bit wider, which is not limited to the country. Doesn't make sense. If it is applied to construction products, and hopefully we avoided that, it means that my products that are recycled in Poland from the material that we might have collected in France will not get any support. Or in Sweden. And we know that for the vast majority of our value chain, we are at least European. So the single market for the Green Deal is extremely important. So all that needs to be taken into account in the Circular Economy Act, and it is not only for the critical minerals.
Thank you very much indeed. Once again, the point that we need to create European circular economy region, not smaller, but it needs to be the European European base of circularity. And construction materials are the big bulk, huge bulk of our materials. And if we can't solve that, the bottles only circulating in beverages doesn't actually help the issue. But that is a good example of certain uses. If you reuse and you recirculate as material with a deposit, the bottles that are used in beverages, you can create a new beverage bottles, but you have some other materials mixed on there. It's the end of the story. And so we need to be in this way very precise what we can do, and whatever. In aluminium, it's a bit different. Can or a package or wherever it comes, you reproduce it, repurpose it as aluminium, and it can be used here or there. But in some other fields, that does not work. Very valuable messages for Circular Economy Act, and hopefully we can solve at least partly these issues and the product regulation. And just one note on here. We are going to have the public procurement revisited next year. We should have this in there so that we can create the pull effect for the market. At least let's buy what we suppose we should be doing. Okay, now these are the industry perspectives, and then we raise the flying level, let's put it that way. World Resource Institute looking the issues from different perspectives. Kevang, thank you that we can have you here, and please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll also talk about circularity for critical minerals, and I thought Walter already talked about battery recycling, and maybe I can talk about 3 additional ways how circularity can contribute to EU's near-term political priorities. And all 3 are short-term opportunities in my point of view. So the first one is still recycling, but it's copper recycling. Why am I singling out copper? Copper is special. First of all, because copper demand growth is robust. Copper is needed by all clean energy technologies, from EV to solar, wind, grid, as well as non-energy sectors, right? Digitization or built environment. It's harder to substitute. So the demand growth is robust. On the supply side, copper supply chain, mining supply chain is very diverse, right? Unlike rare earth or graphite. So that is not an issue. But human beings have been mining copper for thousands of years. So the easy ones are gone already. So the ore grade is getting lower and lower, which meaning it's getting less and less economic to extract, and it's getting more and more wasteful. And copper mining already generates half of all the mining waste in the world. Yeah. But then the good news is we already have lots of copper in our waste stream today. Unlike battery minerals, we don't have to wait for years before the volumes start to rise. We have them today. Europe uses about 4 million tons of copper every year, and half of that already comes from recycled sources, which is really good. But Europe can do better even, because currently Europe loses about 1 million tons of copper from end-of-life waste streams, which are not collected or recycled. And another 500,000 tons of copper scrap are exported. So bringing that together, that's a total of 1.5 million tons of additional feedstock for recycling. And that's available within the border of Europe today. Second, I want to talk about what you already mentioned, that second life battery. So within 5 years from now, the world will start to see a wave of retired EV batteries, and many of them still have 70 to 80% of capacity. Right? Should we send them for recycling as waste, or should we give them a second life in less demanding applications, such as energy storage, or EV charging stations, or microgrids, etc. Now, I think reuse is probably the most controversial and neglected child in the circularity family, right? It has potential to provide affordable access to clean energy, to reduce dependency of imports, but also takes away sales from OEMs. It takes away feedstock from recyclers. And as we see in e-waste, it has been a loophole for illegal dumping, right? So it's complex. We need more debate, we need more research, but let's do that quickly so we will have a game plan with the right incentives and guardrails when the wave starts to rise. The third is EV sizing. I think Walter mentioned that also earlier. The size of EV, our EVs are getting bigger. Today, about 70% of all EV models are SUVs or larger vehicles. And 10 years ago, it was only 25%. Right? So larger EVs needs larger batteries, needs more minerals. The International Energy Agency has estimated that by reducing EV size alone, just this measure alone, can reduce world's demand for critical minerals by 20%. That's massive. And that might be one most immediate action and feasible action Europe or anybody can take to reduce dependency on critical minerals. And smaller EV can also have many other benefits for Europe, right? With US import tariff being so volatile, I think domestic markets are important for EV car industry. And most European cities are designed for small cars, not like the US. But EV adoption in Europe is stagnating. But making EVs smaller and more affordable might be a way to reignite adoption, reduce Europe's energy demand, and can be a competitive advantage for Europe's car industry. So summarizing, I hope I'm trying to simplify the conversation a bit. I think there might be 3 near-term opportunities for circularity to deliver on multiple EU strategic agenda: copper recycling, second life battery, and EV sizing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving bright forward-looking messages also to this discussion. So yes, indeed, we do have a lot of options what we can use to gear the economy on this transition and transformation of the economic system. And before the closing remarks, I promise to be very short there. I would like to give the floor for questions and comments. Yes, please. Anders, if you wait for a second.
I want to commend both this panel and have a specific suggestion for what you said on the use of construction materials. Sirpa has been very kind to receive a group of young people from the National Think Tank. And last year... Sorry, yes. My name is Hans van der Loo. I'm the chairman of the Institute for Integrated Economic Research. We invented the term reality blindness, but I learn every day. This morning, I learned a new term, complexity blindness, and it's equally applicable. Circumstruction is about circular construction, but the points I wanted to make is that what was mentioned about the non-linearity and the density, and I'm very grateful what you said about copper. We investigated that. The average quality of copper ore at the beginning of last century was 2%. Today it is 0.5%, and the biggest copper mine in the world is struggling with 0.4%. The question, of course, is what will it be in 2050? And the answer is, I don't know, but it will be less. So the whole notion that anything to do with renewables will get cheaper all the time is a big, big mistake. Extraction costs do not follow the experience curve. They follow a U-curve. And so what we see now, these people are confusing part of the curve with the total curve. And we're now actually approaching the bottom, where indeed marginally decreasing advantages are being taken over by non-linearly increasing disadvantages for precisely the reasons that you say. One comment on, I like it a lot that you're talking about behavior and demand. And I would like to invite you to consider X-Tax, which is a group that exists already for a number of years. They've spoken here in the parliament as well. What they propose is that we tax resources and not labor. The implications are that products will get more expensive. But the other implication is that repairs will get cheaper. And thus, materials will stay in circulation longer. I was very glad that you said to Mr. Van McArthur that cars typically are not used for 92% of the time. If we then have the 2-ton EVs standing around, not being used for 92% of the time, how do we think that future generations will look back on us? We are the most terrible ancestors you can possibly imagine in gouging these resources that do not belong to 2 or 3 generations, but belong to humanity. And actually, if you, and that's a colleague of Anders, Walter Stahel, who's the guru of recycling, he says recycling is only the 9th thing that you want to do. First, you want to rethink, reuse, redesign. Recycle actually means you are going to do something with the product, as a result of which you will lose part of it, because 100% recycling does not exist. So reuse, repurpose, these kind of things are much better. But the most important thing is to keep things in circulation longer. That is the key message, and that is what the X, it's not my invention, I'm making a little bit of an effort for X. I think it's EX-text, so xtext.org or I'll send it to you so that you will have that. And it's a small film that explains that it makes things more expensive and repairs cheaper. Thank you.
Thank you, and yes, please do introduce yourselves, because we are reusing the material and broadcasting it, and it's easier for others to follow up who's saying and what. Anders, please.
Thank you. Two questions to Walter first. You said towards the end that the question is whether it's going to be profitable or meaningful to recycle some of the batteries in the future. Is the question mark there because there will be new battery designs, or what was the reason behind it? I didn't really fully understand. To Miriam, my question is, and when I look at Sweden now with regard to the construction industry and efforts to bring in the circularity concept, when I meet with some of the companies, they say, well, we think you're right, but on the other hand, our business models are such that we earn much more money if we tear a building down and build a new, instead of using an old one and making the best use of everything. So how can you do something about your business models, or is it only in Sweden?
No, I think it's a general problem in the construction sector that we have fast fashion, we have fast construction as well. Buildings that are built to last 50 years and are crushed down is something that we should ban in Europe. We should repurpose buildings and so on. So that's in my view what the building needs to be made. But at the end, when you change a product, and our products are lasting again for 10, 15, 20 years, at some point we need to recycle them. We have some trials for reusing them, but again, the demand is not there because you need to meet the surface, the ambition of the architect, and the demand should cross the availability of the material. So we are not there yet. There are some platforms that are starting to exist. In France, with the loi AGEC, there are ambitions for a minimum reuse material in new building and construction. But yes, the full system of construction needs to be considered, even how we design housings. In Japan, there are some kind of flat floors where they can be modulated. And the flat you have when you are 20 or when you are a family or when you are retired might not be the same. And there are some buildings that can be repurposed to some extent, adapted. So that's something we need to work with as well. Flexibility is important. Modular construction, we have customers in modular construction, and we can recollect from them to make sure that we can recycle them.
Thank you, and Walter, please.
Yeah. Not wanting to go into the full cost breakdown of recycling, but the point I try to convey is that there's different types of materials that get recycled, and the different types of materials have different values. If you have precious metals inside, that has a different value, also comes with a different concentration compared to primary materials, because you rightfully so said, mine concentrates are going down in concentration, while we talk about the urban mine, the e-waste as an example, which has much larger concentrations of precious metals in it compared to any primary material. For battery recycling, it will also depend on what's the composition, what's the quality of the materials that we get for recycling, and how much of the recycling cost is being paid by the value of the materials that you bring back. And there are different chemistries, there are different technologies, and they have an impact on that. That's the only thing I wanted to convey. It must be integrated, and because in the end, the recycling will not happen if there's not a profitable business case. I mean, no one is going to invest in that, or society is just going to pay for it. You know, somebody has to pay for the recycling, and if it comes largely from the value of the materials that are inside, that's a good position to be in.
But sorry, couldn't one imagine a system where we legislate and say, look, 80 or 90% should be recycled, and then in the marketplace, you will have to increase the cost, of course.
Yeah, but that, I mean, talking batteries, it 80% is long time from here.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, well, I have nothing to add now, but it's yeah,
Complicated.
it's yeah.
Just looking around and I see two hands. Can we pick up the two questions? And then the last comments on that, and then I will be forced to close.
May I? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Wieson. I'm a campaigner at Friends of the Earth Europe. Various people already addressed the importance of demand side reduction measures. It seems there is a majority support for that. As most of you know, this is not sufficiently addressed in the Critical Raw Materials Act nor, or in the implementation, besides monitoring yeah, so, well, mostly that there is no target. An opportunity at the moment is the development of the circular economy, the new Circular Economy Act, for which there is a public consultation open right now. I believe there's no one in the room from DG Environment. I hope that Mr. Cantoni will pass on the message to your colleagues regarding demand reduction. However, yeah, there's no new legislation from your unit coming up. So I would say it's very important to have interdepartmental coordination to achieve demand reduction, which is obviously requires intersectoral effort. It's not just one sector, and it's not easy, quick wins. It's not even just smaller cars. It requires systemic shift. So definitely through the CEA. So that would be, yeah, the mandate of under Roswell, but also other colleagues in other commissioners in the college to make that really a game changer rather than only looking at the end of life. That's it.
Simon Holmström from CSA Trisk, and we are Ocean Conservation Umbrella Organization, and we are also working with Friends of the Earth and other NGOs calling for material footprint targets. Why aren't we talking about that? We are talking about climate targets, we're talking about biodiversity loss targets, but when it comes to demand side targets, where are they? They are a little bit here and there in terms of efficiency, in terms of recyclability, and we're very concerned that the Circular Economy Act would be a green cosmetics, you know, just saying that, you know, we're going to have a little bit of product specific targets here and there, not looking at the high level resource use. So I would encourage you all to think about, perhaps in this public consultation, could we ask the Commission to look a little bit more holistic and include resource use reduction targets?
Well, definitely, and I see Anders' hand is already there, but Jan, you want
I just wanted to say that in the comments that the task force I'm chairing from the Club of Rome wrote to the Commission, we make a strong pitch for material footprint targets. Yeah. And we refer to some countries who have in fact decided upon them. Germany is one of them.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just in one word, I checked before coming to the meeting. I think a couple of colleagues were following online, and maybe some colleagues from DG Environment, but in any event, I'll pass on the message. And just to recall that the Circular Economy Act is a joint initiative by DG Environment and DG GRO. Obviously, the angle that we have is a bit different than DG GRO, than DG Environment. We try to complement each other, but we are looking at everything we can do to improve and increase the circularity. That's clear. In particular, and that was picked up by many before, the single market dimension. From DG GRO's perspective, there's a lot to be done to facilitate the single market functioning when it comes to weight, when it comes to secondary products, and this is something on which we pay a lot of attention. And on the point and part on demand, I agree with you. This is a very horizontal issue that needs to be addressed by very different initiatives if we are going to be able to make a difference. I don't think a single legislative act can do that. if there is interest and if there is political momentum for that kind of initiatives, then it needs to be reflected in a number of initiatives. Okay.
Any of the other panelists needing to have a quick comment? If not, I would like to thank you for excellent event, panel and discussions. Some of the ideas are already long proposed by the Parliament to, like 2012, we proposed the resource efficiency target and indeed the material footprint targets for the products and so forth. What I would like to now suggest is that why don't we in the globe, with your cooperation, try to collect different points, old and new. What are the things we know already that should be in the Circular Economy Act? What are the new things we are still open? We would need to try to find the answers to them and try to sketch that kind of an bullet point or written, not a statement, but sort of a compendium of the issues that could be fulfilled and further developed. And I would add there also, please try to join the next event by Globe and Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because indeed the finance is another part and company reporting. And now we are having obstacles with the omnibus, but we need to reinvent it and take the next steps on sustainable finance. Like in economy also, that is the semester EU's budget about beyond the GDP, that we measure the resource efficiency of member states and companies and so forth. So a lot to be done on that field. Let's join forces. And last but not least, please try to lobby. Because then when I'm trying to look these issues from the politician's perspective, 90% of the message is saying too much. China don't do anything, India don't do anything, especially US don't do anything, and we are only 9% or 2%, whatever we are. So we'll just go back to the yesterday, and that will solve all of our problems. Angry people from businesses telling this is the business's point of view. Please, otherwise you are going to destroy all the workplaces and economy and so on. And then what are you guys doing? Sending a nice letter with 1,000 signatures telling that please do not destroy the company reporting because we kind of need it. It's only one letter. So if you can, as individuals, organizations, companies, to address all the MEPs, all the group leaders, all the commission members, why not the civil servants, but I guess they know quite a lot already. So it is the next level, the problem. And don't forget the council and member states, because if they are blocking, and see what's happening in France, we are in deep trouble, and we need to start it by yesterday already. And if you have any other contacts with companies, organizations, people, ask them to do it and pass the word. Because if we do not create that kind of a noise, we are going to lose this. And I don't know where we end up, but I really hope we won't see that choice, but a bit different kind of a choice. There are good people in the commission working and same people in the parliament and in ministries, in member states and ministers also. But now we need to have a bit of a gut and courage and start sort of rolling our sleeves and positively fighting for the cause. And I know you are already doing it in your everyday life. So once again, thank you very much, and let's keep on contact and continue the discussion and cooperation. Thank you.